We need some customers. Oh, here we go. We got folks coming in. Hello, JR, Pamela, Kim. Thank you for joining. James, thank you for joining. Got 36 people, Glenn, and it looks like we're at half past. Are you ready to get started?
Yeah, no pressure. Yeah, go for it.
We'll rock it. So thanks everybody. I'm Bo Crader. I'm a consultant here at Blackbaud, just the mod. Uh, Presenting today is my good friend Glen Hutson. We've been working together for almost 20 years. Always learn something from Glen. He's going to be talking about extending your Blackbaud tools into the what he's calling the Dataverse. So, Glenn, I'll turn things over to you. But any questions, just put them in the chat, and I'll either kind of toss those to you as we go, or we'll get those answered at the end, Glenn.
Thanks, Bo. Give me just a second while I share my screen. Bo was one of the very first people I actually met at Blackbaud, so interesting to be able to keep working with him to this day. So again, the session is into the Dataverse, leveraging the Microsoft Dataverse to extend your Blackbaud solutions. I'll talk about what this means in a moment. Again, my name is Glen Hutson. I'm a solution architect here at Blackbaud. Been at Blackbaud for not quite as long as Bo has. I've been here for 17 years. In my time here at Blackbaud, I've had the opportunity to implement our solutions and working in various roles. Though I have a degree in computer science, I am not a programmer. I am not a database architect. However, with the new tools and stuff that came up, that we've been adopting as far as the Microsoft Power Platform, I'm one of those that's been able to kind of grasp onto certain things and want to share some of my findings and some of the cool things that I think you may be able to take advantage of. This conversation, we're going to be discussing the ways you can leverage the Microsoft Dataverse to further customize your Blackbaud solutions, some considerations, and some alternatives. If any of you were in the session that came just before this was Simon from the Fred Hutch Center. What I'm about to discuss is the low-code version of the very pro-code approach he's doing. We're actually independent. Did these independently. I've actually found out about his approach not to as I was implementing mine. So if you saw that and all the different things he was doing, and I'll reference it at the end again, this is how you can do it in a low-code manner. So to recap, I'm going to go off camera because I fidget like crazy. I'll be back. All right, I'm still here, just fidgeting. So what is the Microsoft Dataverse? So if you all are familiar with the Microsoft Power Platform, it's got Power Automate, Power Apps, Power BI, Power Pages, Copilot Studio, which used to be virtual agents. Part of the behind the scenes things there is the Microsoft Dataverse that's helping power a number of these things. It's basically the data storage. So you may hear Dataverse, you may actually hear of Dynamics 365. Dynamics 365 is applications that actually use the Dataverse to store and secure the data they use. Think of Dynamics as the app and the Dataverse as the underlying storage. If you actually start digging into some of the advanced settings of the Power Platform, and especially Dataverse, you'll actually see many references to Dynamics. However, the key thing is that the Dataverse comes with many of the subscriptions of the Power Platform, especially Power Apps. So again, we're not working with Dynamics in this discussion, but there is also that relationship there. Now, Dataverse is a data storage area that's part of the Power Platform. How does this compare to Azure? So some people, when you're working with data warehouses and what have you, maybe already having data warehouses or considering data warehouses and what have you. How does Dataverse compare to SQL and Azure and what have you? Well, again, think about Azure as the pro code and Dataverse as the low code. So if you want to really get in and really working with those true data warehousing and merging together data and things like that, that may be something that that Azure SQL would be sufficient for. But for scenarios that I'll be talking about today, as far as supplementing data and massaging some data, this is where the Dataverse may come into play. So I've been talking about, Dataverse is a part of the Power Platform that helps store and manage data. Well, what about SharePoint? So sometimes in the Blackbaud's low-code community, SharePoint is often relied on for intermediate or secondary data storage. this could still be a perfectly acceptable option for many use cases. I'm going to take a list from Razor's Edge, put it in a SharePoint list or a list in SharePoint, and it'll be good to go. That's certainly possible. However, not every organization currently utilizes or has access to SharePoint. And the SharePoint, the Dataverse comes with Power Platform subscriptions. And it also has a number of enhanced features that may prove useful. So again, there's a number of different options at play. I'm focusing on one that may prove beneficial. Now, I've had this conversation with a few individuals, so I wanted to go ahead and touch base with this ahead of time. You may have a Power App subscription or a Power Automate subscription that has Dataverse, but you may not be able to access Dataverse. Your IT policies and permissions may not allow for access to everyone for a variety of reasons. Your IT or other departments may be already using the Dataverse for leveraging other business processes. So maybe they just cut off access for everybody else. The nice thing is the Dataverse has extensive security permissions. So maybe discuss with your IT on if these permissions can be reviewed so that your team can leverage the Dataverse without actually accessing these unrelated tables. Also, Power Platform has a concept of environments. This is not unlike, for example, you may actually have a production environment of Razor's Edge or Financial Edge or what have you, and then a test environment. Those are two different environments. Power Platform has the same concept of environments. You can have two production environments, or you can have production and a development environment. So again, there have been sessions already, and we repeat these in the future. We make these on demand as far as all the licensing stuff that comes into play. But maybe a matter that says, hey, maybe the IT team or the other teams or the data analyst team that has already kind of claimed the Dataverse from your main Power Platform environment. Maybe it's a matter of, okay, let's have a development office or a business office or a finance office environment spun up so that we can work and use our own Dataverse without necessarily running into somebody else's. So what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to be borrowing from data warehousing concepts. I'm going to focus on providing this is going to give us an opportunity to provide custom tables to solutions such as Razor's Edge NXT. So this is not a full data warehouse conversation that oftentimes we've had great ones during the process of the developers conference. But here it's going to be really focusing on Dataverse as a way to provide custom tables. And I'll give some examples in a few moments. We'll also be able to leverage Sky add-ins to service this data in the solution. And the nice thing about this, and this concept here about using the Dataverse to store this extra data that you may be collecting and needing to keep track of, this is going to help decrease the overusing of custom fields and attributes. So we've got a lot of native fields within Razor's Edge NXT, and I keep picking on Razor's Edge. It was one of the first products I learned, but this also applies to Financial Edge, applies to education management, and in some ways, some of our other solutions. We've got native fields for a lot of stuff, but if you need to track some additional information, as far as these solutions go, before you get to our enterprise solutions, is put them all in custom fields or attributes. Well, if you keep doing that, things can get a little crazy. So this may actually help decrease that reliance on these custom fields and attributes, so make things a little bit cleaner. And because of the fact that we can take this information from another place and pull it into Razor's Edge, then that means that your frontline staff is not going to have to pivot between different systems in order to actually see different pieces of information. A bit of a disclaimer, as I mentioned in the beginning here, I'm not a pro coder. I'm a low coder. I've managed and worked with database solutions in the past, such as even my MS SQL and MySQL. This definitely took things to a new level with me. Main focus here is on the outcomes. I may show you some things. You may go, Glenn, why did you do it that way? That is not a best practice. I admit this is not a best practice. So as I was going through this, I'm already realizing ways that I can do things better. But the idea is like, how can we get to the great endpoint? One of the things I will mention, and you might have heard mentioned a number of different places, is that when you take data out of Razor's Edge, even if you put it in the Microsoft Dataverse, just like if you put it in the data warehouse in Azure, even if you download it to your desktop, the responsibility of that data becomes your responsibility. May be obvious to most people, but we need to make sure we say that just so there's no confusion about those different areas there. So let's talk about a high-level view of what I'm talking about. So I've got native NXT data, Razor's Edge NXT data, that is being pushed into the web view. Though I can actually take also some of this data and push it into the Dataverse, or actually pull data. I forgot part of this the slide, or actually pull data from other places, pull it into the Dataverse, and then push this information in any custom formats within NXT. Again, I'll show a couple of examples of this of, hey, I need my data. I've got my data. I've got this data stored within Razor's Edge, but I needed to actually have it showing up a different way than the native ways within Razor's Edge. So the idea here is I can take that native data, I can push it into the Microsoft Dataverse, and then I can reformat it and then push it back into the web view of NXT so it shows up in a way that others may find beneficial. So how can I accomplish this? How can I actually get information that may already be in Razor's Edge that if I want to reformat, reshow, or what have you in different ways within the web interface? Well, the nice thing is that with the advent of the Query API, which we're still rolling out, we're targeting this summer to have the Query API out for everybody. I think it's already available for Financial Edge. We're still rolling it out for Razor's Edge side. You can actually take and use that Query API and use Power Automate to help extract a lot of that data and throw it into a temporary storage space, such as OneDrive. And then the Dataverse actually has a concept called data flows that on a regular basis will go through and automatically pick up this information. This may not be unsimilar to a concept you're already working with already, maybe using Q to put in the FTP file or folder or what have you. So the nice thing is that it can be a very straightforward process in order to actually get this information from Razor's Edge into the Dataverse. And once you've got it set up, it can be a recurring method. The nice thing is as well, I'll get to another screen in a minute, is that once you do that first load, the Dataverse has a concept of incremental loads. So as I'm taking data out of Razor's Edge and putting it into my temporary storage, the Dataverse can be smart enough to go, hey, I'm only going to pull in the new data. So this gets around having to necessarily always have to worry about exporting the entire database or the entire data set at one time and have to reload it. The nice thing about the Dataverse is that it can go through, you can say, hey, here is the date column that's in the export file or the Query API file, not to confuse that with export. Use this and only start pulling in the current, the new data. So again, as far as getting information from the Query API or from Razor's Edge, you can use Power Automate to pull out the Query API, dump it into temporary storage, and then allow for the Dataverse to actually come through and pick up this information. The nice thing is that with this picked up information, then you can go through and start massaging that data using a number of different things. Again, I'm a big Power Automate person because this is talking about the Power Platform. Then I can actually go through, massage this data, and redo this the way that, and rehandle things the way I want to. How does this handle deleted records? It's up. I have not accounted for that yet. That's a very good question. I've always been adding records. There are ways, as I'm thinking through, there are ways that you would be able to go to and say, hey, do I even see this constituent record anymore at all? And if not, delete. Or you may still keep it within the Dataverse for historical purposes. Either way, but I've actually not gotten that far yet. But good question, Dan. So I've been talking about a lot of stuff. The key thing right here is that we can actually, I've been talking a lot of stuff. The key thing is the fact that we can actually get information out of Razor's Edge into the Dataverse and then start manipulating with it. Now, what are sort of some tangible, what is in it for me type scenarios? The first scenario is custom lifetime giving. The need here is to create custom lifetime giving stats separate from the Razor's Edge NXT default. so that you can also filter on funds or campaigns. We already have the ability within Razor's Edge NXT to, within the settings, to do things such as based on gift type. But what if I'm taking donations or transactions, and we can't really count everything as a donation, and I don't want things in certain funds or campaigns or appeals show up in certain in my fundraising stats? So we can actually use this process to pull all the information, or limited or whatever, into the Dataverse, and have the Dataverse help us go through and do that manipulation. And we can actually just throw all this information into a single Dataverse table. I call this the faux smart fields table. Now, if you've worked with some of our other solutions, so those of you that may work with the likes of Blackbaud CRM and Altru, yes, this is the faux version of those smart fields. So as you see on the screen here, I've got an example of the table. I've got my constituent record ID. If people recognize that, 280s Robert Hernandez in our sample environments. And I've actually pulled in and managed to go through and say, okay, I've got my real hard credit data. I've got my Power Automate processes that is actually going through, and I'll talk about a really cool new thing that I discovered through this, as far as going through and handling that. I'm going to hide this thing here. And of course, the Sky add-ins can actually surface the data. So the cool thing is that, hey, I'm pulling out of Razor's Edge. Power Automate is slicing and dicing it. I'm throwing it into a new table, my faux smart fields, and I can use Sky add-ins to service the data. So what does that mean? That means that using this and Sky add-ins, and my Sky add-ins are being powered by Power Automate as well. In this case here, I'm using adaptive cards, if those that may be familiar with that. So I've got this new tile here that when Robert's record loads, this tile loads, it's looking at what his constituent record ID is. It's real time going to the Dataverse database. And this is Power Automate that's powering it. So Power Automate and the Dataverse are part of the same system. So it makes the time that much quicker. It is actually pulling that data directly into Robert's record. So at the bottom, I actually see things such as the standard giving. But at the top, and I picked some of the most common funds that we have in our example just so we can see the difference here. At the top is going to be my custom lifetime giving. It has taken the gifts received. I'm being even more specific as far as what do I mean by the committed. I'm making sure I'm saying committed but not paid, and my soft credits. So in this case here, almost half the donations he's given were actually about a third of the donations he's given. I can't do math, even though I did a minor in math. About a third of the donations he's given, the transactions, we're actually not counting for this lifetime giving, because we could have a 514, a political arm that doesn't count for donations that we separate, or some of these donations could be for event registrations in which there's really no monetary thing, and we don't want to count that, or we want to compare the two. So these two tiles may actually go hand in hand. What is his overall, and what is our edited one out? So we've got the result. One of the cool things that I discovered, now when you go through and you think about doing additions, those of you that work in Power Automate frequently, when we've got these different numbers and things like that, oftentimes we have to resort to doing things such as apply to eaches that last forever to go through and actually do the tallying and math. Did Dan have another question? Yeah, Dan, I think I answered Dan's question as far as the deleted records. I haven't gotten there yet. I don't know. I haven't figured out how best to do that yet. So when we were going through the likes of doing math within Power Automate, we have to go through and do apply to eaches or whatnot. In regards to, and that can take a while. As part of working with the Dataverse within Power Automate, I discovered this thing that's called Fetch XML Query. And what this is a easier for me to say, a query syntax that can be used in gathering data from the Dataverse. It can be part of an action or a step in the Power Platform and Power Automate. Some of the key features for this is that as for these exercises that as I'm doing this query, it can group by constituent. It can actually do summarization of fields. The nice thing about this is that in one pass, the query in the Dataverse, the gift table can filter on gift types and funds, as well as sum the totals of each constituent all at once. I need to rephrase that bullet point. So instead of having to do this in one step and do this in another step, filter the funds in one step, do the math in the other step, combine the stuff in another step, I can actually do all these in one step. I'm using this fetch XML query, which is only available to the Dataverse. It's not available when we're talking about SharePoint tables. I do the process in chunks of constituents, in this case based on the constituent system record ID, to minimize timeouts and the fact that the Dataverse only limits things to 5,000 rows at a time. Now, here's an example. Now, don't hit the roof if you're looking at this because I've got but wait, it gets better in just a moment. But to the right is an example of the fetch XML query. It cycles through the segments of constituents based on the system record ID. It filters out those funds that we're not counting for custom lifetime giving, ensures that only the receipted gifts are counted, and I'm not counting stock property unless it's actually sold. So I know sometimes that mouses don't really show great on this presentation, but you may see up here about a third of the way down, I'm saying, hey, if the fund is not equal to building or acquisition, because I'm removing these out of the system. And I'm also saying about half the way down and further that I only want to include those gifts that are cash, pay cash, matching gift, pay cash, recurring gift, pay cash, and so forth. So this is going to allow me to be very specific when I'm summing all this information up, how I want to go through and count the stuff up. So I'm doing what typically are maybe multiple steps in a Power Automate flow, doing this in a single step. And at the very top, I actually have a thing that says amount aggregate equals sum. That basically means I want to sum all this together for each constituent. So again, the good news is it's going to lessen the steps that we traditionally have to do in Power Automate. The bad news is I have to learn a new query. James, yes. Could I use this to provide totals by fund for a given constituent? Yes, if it's in the Dataverse first. Now, don't stress. There's an app for that. So there is a tool out there. Unfortunately, it's available. I'm a Mac person, and unfortunately, this is a PC app, so I had to fire out Parallels to actually access this, but it was worth it. There is a tool out there called the XRM Toolbox. It's basically a community source tool for working with the Dataverse. There's a lot of stuff this tool does, and my mind has been blown. Again, this is an open source free solution. My mind's blown about all the stuff it can do because I'm just now getting into the Dataverse. One of the key things, though, is that there is something that's called the Fetch XML Builder that will actually help you put together these complicated queries without having to do the coding. We're low coding the low coding. The nice thing is that it includes a Power Automate conversion, and this is the thing to the right, that will actually take that coding and automatically translate it, so you just copy and paste it into Power Automate. This is promoted but not supported by Microsoft. This is actually found it through Microsoft documentation. Then, of course, there's no affiliation with Blackbaud, but great. It's a great thing. So if you notice to the right side of this field, I see, name, manufacturer. This is the screenshot from there. I meant to get a screenshot from my real world, but this is their screenshot. But the format of this is eerily similar to working with queries in the database view of Razor's Edge and eventually the web view. So if you can do Razor's Edge NXT and FE NXT queries, you can do this. Again, it's learning something new. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but the nice thing is that we've got this, if it's just another querying thing, it'll spit out all of the cryptic stuff that all you have to do is copy and paste it. So again, big time saver. Learned a lot to this. Made a lot of mistakes. but it's actually really a nice thing. So we're not getting into super low code, but we're still not in pro code. Maybe mid code, light to mid code, medium, rare code. I don't know. Now, for those of you that work with databases and kind of thinking through the process, you might have actually worked with a Dataverse before. Another time saver I came up with is create your own GUID. What's a GUID? What's he saying? Globally unique identifier are those cryptic strings that usually identifies rows in Microsoft solutions. They're also called universally unique identifiers elsewhere. This when you're looking at data, if you ever look at a database behind the scenes, you've got this crazy set of different numbers here. That's what we call a GUID. Typically, these are auto-generated. Because they're auto-generated, that means when you're working with different tables and stuff like that, it makes it a little bit harder. I have to do a couple of extra steps to go through and find the record that I'm looking for. What I have found is that you can actually create your own GUID so that you can actually cut down, in the long story short, which may be too late, but this means you can actually cut down a lot of stuff in order for all the steps. So this is going to speed up a number of areas right here and allows you quick access to data without having to search and filter on rows. So an example for this proof of concept here, my constituent record ID is 280 from Robert, and I was able to go ahead and automatically create the key indicator on this. I'm mixing terminology here, but the key thing in this row, I'm actually basing it on Robert's record, so that if I need to do any calls directly to the database, because when you store this database, I actually have to call it based on this. I actually already know what this cryptic string is, because it's going to be based on my constituent record. So the nice thing about the stats with this, Lawrence, I'm actually, the key thing here is I am basing this on the constituent record ID, or the system, previously known as is the system record ID that we're basing this on. So there's some terminology changes between database view and web view in 7, and I do it all the time, and I mix the terms myself, so apologies for that. But yeah, it's the system record ID that I'm using all the time. So in doing the summarizing of gifts with filtered funds, in my example database here, I was using these, those of you that are familiar with the Sky Developer cohort, I was using that as my example. There was almost 75,000 gifts. In this example, I'm counting each split as a separate gift, so I can be very specific about if there was a split gift that one gave to one fund and the other the other, with 58 or 15, almost 5,900 donors and almost 43,000 constituents. When I did all this cycling through the first time to get all these information, the custom lifetime giving, the initial workflow without concurrency, which means going through one record or one set of records at a time, took 44 minutes and 11 seconds. When I turned on concurrency for the loops that are available within Power Automate, it brought that down to 8 minutes and 59 seconds. So these things you will not be kicking off at 12 noon, but again, probably at 2 o'clock in the morning, so that you're not necessarily waiting on it. Scenario 2, custom groups. This is a big feature that I often often hear about for Razor's Edge NXT. It's actually something that we have available in Blackbaud CRM and Alltrue, but they're not available in Razor's Edge NXT. To be able to create custom groups beyond the household and record relationships native in Razor's Edge. My specific focus here is going to be, again, focusing on that giving of an overall group and looking at the information on constituent record. This actually has a number of different tables that I have. I'm going to, in my Dataverse, I have the faux group types, I have the faux groups, and I have the faux group members. I really had fun with the name faux. For those of you that work with CRM, I actually based it off that architecture. Then I've actually got flows going on that computes the group total giving. that cycles through the members of each of the group on a regular basis using fetch XML and shows that in the saves that back to the Dataverse. Now, of course, then we can have Sky add-ins using the constituent tile to list the group membership and the flyout giving additional details. So what does this mean? This means now that within Razor's Edge, I can have my custom groups. I can have my households. I can have my board members. So in my examples here, what I put together is that there's a custom groups tile within Robert's record that says what groups is he a member of. One of them is a household. The other one is a committee. So he's part of the Hernandez household. He's also a board member. In this case here, I'm actually tracking, I want to track what the total household giving has been. Maybe it's spread out between Robert and Wendy. And the board members, maybe the board members as a whole, or maybe individually, have a fundraising goal themselves. So I'll actually be able to see this directly on Robert's record. One of the nice things as well is about piping this through to the Dataverse. I can be very specific using the same filters I talked about a few moments ago. What is going to count? Maybe I'm doing one set of metrics for the individual giving. Maybe I'm doing a different set of metrics for these for this group giving. Maybe I'm doing a different set of metrics for the board versus households. Now, the more you distinguish these, the more processes you have into play. But the nice thing about this is that this gives you the ability to be very specific. So the nice thing is that I can see he's a member of the Hernandez household. Board members click on it and then or click on each of those, and I can see a fly out about the household. Again, see the total gifts, see who else is part of that household, and then links back to those individual records. Now, there's an example of the board members, so I can see, as far as who else are board members and how much they've given. Again, I've not had to leave Robert's record. Organizational giving is another thing that I've also had. I think every third or fourth call I have with customers is I need to go through and figure out and at least know how much an organization is giving, especially when they're multi-tier. They got the main parent, they got the subsidiaries and what have you. One of the things that you could potentially do is soft credit. Every time the subsidiary gives something, soft credit it back to the parent org. So that maybe you just go always to the parent org and see what the total giving of the entire corporation is. Some people love soft credit. Some people love them just as much as split gifts. I'll put it that way. So the nice thing is that this will give you an alternative option that says, hey, we'll take, the overall giving for each of these different centers within ABC Learning and the downtown branch and Park Center. I'm sending those over to Dataverse. I'm doing the manipulation over there. And then when I pop over and actually look on the record, the ABC Learning's record or any of the different branches, it'll go ahead and render that tile, pull the data from the Dataverse, and allow me to actually see that information right here. Really great, especially for those corporate-based fund gift officers or what have you, those major gift officers. ABC Learning comes up, and I don't have to flip through a whole bunch of different things. I can see that as a corporation, they've raised $3,000. So as far as kind of working through all those pieces, there's a lot of stuff for me to do still that I need to think through. Dan brought up a good question that I can't believe I didn't think about that. What happens when you lose a constituent or delete a record? Not lose a constituent, that's sad. But what happens when a record is deleted? Good question. I know we can take that into account. I just haven't figured that out yet. This has been a huge learning experience. Right now, I actually have to be in the Dataverse in order to actually do these groups. I need to build those. I need to figure out a way to build those within Razor's Edge NXT. I'm thinking about doing this via Power Apps because even though the licensing for Power Apps is a bit interesting sometimes, this is purely an administrative function. So, and because it's all part of the Power Platform, maybe just because you can actually, there's options within Power Apps to say, go look at this table and create me an app. What I'm doing right now is that I need to go through and switch all my stuff to incremental because I'm pulling all the data in at one time. And I need to go through and kind of do some streamlining as far as my add-ins go. So again, this has been a learning experience that's not complete, but definitely something I was really excited once a number of things started coming together. Some learnings and good to knows. Though this doesn't require full database or SQL knowledge, it's still not a beginner level. But again, you don't, use, as I mentioned before, the Dataverse is a low code, air quotes, of the more gargantuan things such as SQL Server, Azure SQL Server, and what have you. If you've been working with the SharePoints or Power Automate, you're going to see a lot of similarities. And again, key thing is this data, this custom data, doesn't live in Razor's Edge NXT. So even though I can surface these on tiles within Razor's Edge, I can't get those to reporting in Razor's Edge. If you're this far, you're probably already, if you're manipulating data to this level, you're probably already talking about or thinking about using Power BI. So this will come into play. I mentioned this before. There was a session right before mine called from file to tile, journey across the sky. Was right before this one. Simon from the Fred Hutch Center did the super pro code version of this. I was really impressed with what he did. Actually, I had the chance to meet him when I was working on this scenario back even last year. I had a chance to meet with him during BBCon, and I was like, wow, this is like the extreme other end of this. So check out the recording once that's posted. So I know we've got about, if I can see, about 8.5 minutes left. So that's where I am now. Again, a lot of learning experiences, a lot more to do, but want to just kind of wanted to share what I've already got out there to maybe kind of help inspire or come up with some ideas, or know that, hey, to do some of the cool things you've seen others do, you can still do it via low code. In Sebastian, as far as the recordings posted, you can actually go back to the agenda builder, and once things are available, you can go through and work on this or look at this. So, James, this whole Dataverse thing is brand new to me. I think Bo might posted some links. If you can dig those up, maybe you want to post those again. There's a lot of free training that's available in Microsoft and Microsoft Learn. Just like we have a Learn, they have a Learn. That's probably where, because in the low code community here on the Blackbaud side, we've not really started diving. I know some people have, but really haven't started diving into the Dataverse yet. For the reasons that not everybody has access to it, because all that is different security settings and such. So you probably won't find much Blackbaud resources, but there's a ton of Microsoft resources on it. And as you go through those resources, you may see reference to Dynamics, because it actually helps support Dynamics as well. So that's the way we're kind of, interesting scenarios when you work cross platforms like this. I'll pause to see if there's any questions. Again, hopefully, thanks for those that gave the proverbial thumbs up on this. Hopefully it gives you some ideas. There's a lot to think through, but hopefully this can help kind of fill in some of those pieces and give you some of those additional options to think about, or even when you're talking to your developers or what have you, maybe just more vocabulary you can use to get someone else to do it.
And Glenn, I'm looking at the Q&A. I feel like we've addressed as best as we can the questions. How does Dataverse compare with Fabric? What happens if the constituent ID changes? You talked about the GUID, system record ID. How does it handle deleted records? That's something to follow up on. But Lawrence also asked a more technical question. What are the other options other than fetch XML? I don't know if you have an answer for that, but I don't know if there's other options out there.
So there are other options. There are a number of ways that the Dataverse itself can do its own calculations. Though to a certain level, it's actually starting to also implement the FX code in regards to being able to actually do some coding directly there, which is different than fetch XML. You can just do old school, just lots of just apply to each loops. So natively within Power Automate, you can start with a variable and just start looping through it to just add to it. So that's the default way of doing things. How does the Dataverse handle incremental refreshes? Kind of on the same line. When you can actually turn on incremental refreshing for a data flow. You tell it what is the date field to look at, so it knows. For example, I output the date modified field as far as my exports go. So you can tell, hey, go look at this field and only accept the stuff that's been recently modified. So again, kind of took my train of thought there. But as far as the different ways other than fetch XML, there are a few out there. I was scared of it when I first discovered it, but especially when I discovered that toolbox and the fact that you don't have to be a code, that was great. Dataverse compared to Fabric, it doesn't. So it's as far as I see, Noah's one. Dataverse and Fabric is like more aligned to Power BI. Dataverse is where it can be the data storage area that you can be used for that.
And Glenn, if folks have questions, you posted your email there, but you're also in the Blackbaud community, right? I'm going to post that link. That might be a good place to post questions. Then we're kind of crowdsourcing some of these as well.
Yes, I would. If you've got questions, post them in the teams first. So this is more of like an SOS type scenario. Actually, working with the Power Platform is not my day job. Just my managers let me kind of play around a little bit. So the community is going to be your faster thing.
With this work,
with this Dataverse work with Teams, the Teams Dataverse, it's got limited. My understanding, because I have not seen a scenario that only has the Teams version of Dataverse. It's a little bit more scaled down. I know there's some limits on that. I just don't know what it is right now. But again, if you've got Power Apps and Power Platform, or Power Automate premium licenses, and they're really kind of low cost for nonprofits, then you'll be able to have access to that.
Great. Any further questions for Glenn? Well, Glenn, we're right at time. I suggest we wrap up a minute early. Thank you for your time, and thanks to everyone who participated in the chat. So great session. I definitely learned some things. So thank you, everyone.
Did you put up the survey?
Yes, take the survey if you haven't already.
Okay.
Yes, I put it up, Glenn. I don't think we can see it from our end.
Yeah, we can't see it. I was just making sure. Not self-serving at all.
Thank you, everyone.